Hello everyone. Welcome to Mr. Noctory, boring ancient history stories for sleep. Tonight, we're not attending a party with Caesar, not riding a chariot through the Roman marketplace. No, we're going to work, that's right, hauling bricks. Bricks are heavy, but even heavier is the silence of Rome, where your name must not be spoken. 8 hours of labor that feels like 3 lifetimes. The sun pours down like hot olive oil, soaking through your tunic. The smell of sweat, of stone, of burned brick. Rome smells industrial. You count bricks to know you're still alive today. Before we begin, if you truly find this a pleasant place to hide away at night, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly want to. Like the rules in an old tavern, only if you need a quiet corner. And you know what I love most? It's reading the comments and seeing where you're from and what time it is. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 in the morning or 5 in the morning, you're still here. And I see you. Now dim the lights, turn on a small fan if you have one. Not for the heat, but for the gentle humming sound. You wake up, not because of an alarm, but because someone dropped a pile of bricks on the stone floor. Specifically, 1 brick landed on a cat. The cat screams, the rooster crows, and you, from a musty straw nest, spring up like a soldier summoned to battle. The battle of a new day. You rub your eyes, stiff like river stones. Sit up, your back cracking as if your spine just filed for retirement. You look around, a 4 square meter room, walls made of dirt mixed with dry straw, cracked from last season's rain, a low ceiling to trap warmth but failing to trap the smell. A window? No. Just a rectangular hole covered by a half-dried goat hide, half sunshine, half stench. Like a reminder that you're still alive, but maybe shouldn't be celebrating yet. This room you call home, or temporary brick nest. You put on what's called a tunic, a piece of cloth larger than a towel, smaller than your dignity. It's made of coarse wool, once white, but now the color of unresolved tax documents. If you washed it, it might disintegrate from emotional distress. So thin that if you stand against the light, you officially enter the category of respectable nudity. You tie it with a rope, formerly used for binding pigs, now rebranded as a fashion belt. Then you slip on your straw sandals, what Romans would call calte if they were fancy, but yours are the step-in and they rip version. The soles are as thin as government promises, the straps as loose as your will after a brick shift. The shoes are worn, soles torn, but still comforting. Like an ex, no longer suitable, but hard to throw away. You open the door to go outside. The first scent that slaps your nose is feces. Could be cow, could be human, maybe a democratic blend. The sky's not yet fully bright, but the whole street is already echoing. Bricks here. You ready? Bring the rope. The clatter of pots, the wail of a child who wet the straw, the raspy cough of an old woman choking on brick dust, all blend into a symphony of ancient existence. Here, there is no gentle music, only the sound of labor, hunger, and a bit of hope trapped in the lungs. Bricks here. You ready? Bring the rope. No one asks, did you sleep well? No one makes coffee. Only the slap of footsteps, the rattle of ropes, and breaths heavy as grindstones. You lift the empty brick basket onto your back. Before stepping across the threshold, you pause, not to pray, but to take 1 deep breath. Inhale the smell of smoke, of manure, of your own stale sweat rising from your tunic. as if you need to remember who you are before disappearing into the nameless crowd outside. Tighten the rope and tell yourself, well, at least it's not raining today. And just like that, you begin walking. A man, in the dawn of Rome, taking the first steps on a stone path as cold as the destiny of a brick hauler. You arrive at a crossroads, where people usually pause for a few minutes before work. No one speaks loudly. Each person eats like they're trying not to disturb even themselves. Eyes down, arms wrapped around a piece of stale bread, like holding onto an old bad habit. No one asks, is it good? Because everyone knows the answer would make the meal heavier with sorrow. Only chewing sounds, breathing, and frowns, as today's bread turns out harder than yesterday's. You sit on a stone by the roadside, a piece that once belonged to a fallen wall, now repurposed as a breakfast bench. You pull out a piece of bread, dried since yesterday or the day before, or maybe from the Republic era. Sometimes you think of pulse, the thick barley porridge poor folks get to eat on special days. The last time you had it was at your landlord's son's birthday. And though it was as bland as the old man's blessings, at least it was hot and warm and different from bread. Roman bread for the poor isn't the soft, buttery kind. It's heavy, dense, and if thrown at someone's head, could cause injury. You chew, slowly. Each crunch echoes crack in your heart, not because it's good, but because you still have teeth to chew. You sip some watered-down vinegar wine called posca, the drink for people with low income and high forgiveness. Made from diluted sour wine, posca is the staple of soldiers, slaves, and anyone whose taste buds have given up. It was drunk by Roman troops to both hydrate and stay alert. It's sour, salty, and smells like it was stored next to dirty laundry. But it helps push down the dry bread, temporarily. Next to you is Gaius, a co-worker, also the only man who smiled at you once last year. He pulls out a small cloth pouch. Inside is a slice of goat cheese sweating oil, an olive, and a fly feasting. You look. He looks back. No words exchanged. He turns away, like a European king unwilling to share his throne. You chew on. The bread begins to soften, not because it's better, but because your tears are soaking in. In the distance, a vendor shouts, "Onions, cheap onions. Fresh garlic this morning, spicy and strong." That's the Vicus, the little market for labourers, where everything is cheap, spoiled, and shouted with unwavering confidence. You once bought an egg there. It was cracked, stinky, and labelled "laid this morning." Since then, you've stuck with bread. At least it doesn't lie. Onions, cheap onions. But you have no money. And if you eat onions in the morning, your co-workers might throw you into the lime pit. This is breakfast. No runny yolk, no melting cheese, just a bit of carbohydrate and patience that refuses to dissolve. But you eat, because if you don't eat, you won't have strength to carry. And if you don't carry, you won't survive. You wipe your mouth with your sleeve, or more precisely, the least dirty part of it. Then you stand. The belt tightens. Light begins to rise above the rooftops. The construction site calls your name. And you keep walking, with a belly almost empty, and a burden packed tight across both shoulders. You arrive at the construction site. They're building a public bathhouse, the kind with vaulted ceilings and hot water pools, supposedly for the whole neighborhood. But before any nobleman can soak in essential oils, you have to carry 3,000 bricks across a slope as bumpy as a new tax law. No one greets you. No one needs to. There's just a pile of bricks waiting. as if it already knew you were coming and had made a plan to hurt your shoulders all day. The foreman stands there, leather whip in hand, shouting in a voice like he's trying to wake up souls that already gave up on life. You heard he used to be a slave, freed, then hired to supervise the ones who once looked like him. Maybe that's why he's stricter, louder, colder. Rome has a particular talent, turning the beaten into the ones holding the whip. He doesn't say hello. He says, 3 loads this morning. Anyone late gets bricks on their head. You nod, not out of fear, but because nodding is easiest, requires no effort, no argument. You strap the basket onto your back, bend down. Your hands reach for each brick, red, rough, heavy as the consequences of a bad decision. You stack them like memories. The sharp ones go on the bottom, the less painful ones on top. Each brick is stamped, the name of the kiln or the landowner. Tiberius, Maximus, Lucius, names that'll go into history books. But you, the one who carries them, have no name, only a spine and a quiet question. If I die under these bricks, will anyone remember I passed through here? Then you stand. Your back makes a strange sound. Could be a tendon, could be faith. Both are old now. You walk through the market gate, up the slope, onto the construction steps. The road is paved with stone, slippery, packed with people like everyone's running from something, usually debt. You move through the crowd, sweat dropping from your chin to your feet, then evaporating into nameless exhaustion. Each step is a curse weighing 5 kilograms. Every pause is a negotiation between body and mind. Do we still need to live, or just stop here? You glance to your left. The man there carries twice as much, smiling like the bricks weigh nothing. To your right is an old woman. Her basket carries no bricks, only straw. But she walks with the group, because if I don't go, people will forget I ever existed. You lower your head. No one sings. No one tells stories. The only sound is breath, fabric grinding against shoulders, bricks bumping into each other. Rome was built from that very silence, from people who ask for nothing but a full meal and a spine that survives until sundown. Not from shame, but because if you lift your head, the bricks will slip down your neck and you'll die a stupid death. But on brand. You arrive, dump the bricks onto the floor, take a deep breath, then turn around. No one claps, no music plays, just the foreman's voice. Second trip, now. And you bend down again, repeat. A cycle no one writes history about, but everyone survives because of. You don't know if Rome will ever be finished, but you know, if you stop carrying, Rome won't have walls, no arenas, no libraries, no toasted bread with cheese like in the movies. You're the rough part, the heavy part, the part without a name in the architecture, but you're the part that keeps it standing. By midday, the sun officially speaks, not in words, but with 100-degree heat, plus lime dust, smoke from the brick kiln, and wind bouncing off stone streets like a pre-electric sauna. Rome's summer climate isn't just hot. It's a silent psychological test, where anyone who stands still gets roasted from the inside out. No words, just that glare straight down your neck like an angry god. No rain, no clouds, just fire from the sky. Your tunic, thin since morning, is now stuck to your back like a second skin, offering nothing but your own sweat. It's woven from coarse wool or cheap linen, not absorbent, not breathable, and absolutely unfit for working under 100-degree sun. You once thought, if someone invented a fabric that actually cared, it'd take another 1,500 years. With every step, You feel like you're being lightly grilled on both sides. Outside is Rome. Inside is a skillet. Roman sunlight isn't the "oh pretty, let me take a selfie" kind. It's the "watch me cook you" kind. Dust rises from red bricks, blending with smoke from the nearby kiln, where bricks are fired non-stop with dry wood, peat, and leftover hope. Each brick retains heat like a shard of broken sun, freshly scooped from flame. The air around you feels crushed by the rising heat from building materials. Limestone, Roman cement, and unfinished walls, all radiating like they personally object to your existence. The entire atmosphere is as sharp as a text from your ex, dry, hot, and makes you want to cough. But you don't, because coughing costs energy. You sip some water. It's as warm as foot rinse. But you drink, not out of thirst, but because if you don't do something to stay alert, you'll drift off, right there in the noon light. At this point, you're not thinking, just carrying, setting down, turning back, carrying again. Each move is a reflex, like your body wrote a simple code. If breathing, then carry. Rome doesn't pay you to faint before lunch. Rome only remembers those who didn't fall. You hear the foreman yell at someone, "Can't carry, then leave. No one needs the weak." A young man, probably new, quietly drops his basket. Bricks fall to the ground with a dull thunk, as cold as truth. You don't turn your head, not because you don't care, but because if you look one more time, your shoulder will break from things heavier than bricks. Noon arrives. Shadows stretch across the half-built brick walls, each one a copy of you, thin, hunched, clinging to every stone. You and that shadow do the same job. Carry. No complaints, no stopping. You tell yourself, "I'm helping build an empire." Then think, or maybe the empire is climbing on my back. Either way, Rome still stands, and you haven't fallen yet. And that, in itself, is already a triumph. Finally, it's break time. No bell, no signal, just your back sitting itself down like a sack of rice with a torn bottom. At a Roman construction site, no one announces break time. People just quietly stop, when one more step would collapse them, and no one has the strength to catch anyone else. No one shouts break. You just see the person in front stop, then the next. Then you, by momentum, drop down like a straw sack tossed into the shade. You choose to sit by an unfinished stone pillar. It doesn't block much sun, but at least it doesn't scream in your face like the foreman. You lean your back against the stone. It's hot, but you're hot too. Two heats leaning into each other, oddly comforting. You pull out leftover bread, a small piece from the morning, harder than your ex. Lunch for someone like you isn't different from breakfast, except the bread has now been sun-dried a second time. If lucky, maybe a few salted olives left from yesterday, or a slice of goat cheese with a light green mold, more a sign of time than spoilage. No spoon, no cloth. No one asks what you'd like to drink. You chew, not because you're hungry, but because your mouth needs something to do to forget the ache creeping from your neck down your back, like a wave of sorrow. Gaius, the old co-worker, is still there. He says nothing. Neither do you. Both of you look in the same direction, the wall being built, the pile of waiting bricks, and the sun, still, existing in the most disrespectful way. No one jokes, no one tells funny stories, no one makes eye contact, as if looking too long would reveal the exhaustion everyone's trying to hide. Break time here isn't for recovery, it's just to not collapse. A silence not born from peace but from depletion. Midday break is sacred, where everyone is quiet, just to keep the last bit of calm. An old woman pulls out a cloth bag, blows off the dust, takes out a piece of blue mold cheese, chews like she's eating memory. A young man lies on his back, eyes closed, hand still holding the rope, ready to wake up and carry on like he never stopped. You look up, no clouds, no birds, just light shining straight down into your life, like a reminder. You can rest, but soon you have to go back. You take a long breath. The air enters your lungs like an old stream, and you think, if Rome truly is great, then that greatness was built by people who sit and breathe like you at noon in the shadow of a wall that doesn't even exist yet. Break time ends. No whistle. No one bangs a gong. Just a few people quietly stand up, dusting off the extra layer of dirt from their hems and putting their baskets back on, like putting themselves back on. You stand up too. Your basket is woven from coarse hemp rope, edges torn, the bottom patched with an old piece of leather that used to be Gaius's sandal. No one gives you a cart. That's a privilege for hired soldiers or those with connections. You have 2 legs, 1 back, and a promise no one remembers was ever made. That act of standing is not easy. Your knees make a pop sound, like they just rejected another lifetime of labor. But you still stand, because here, standing is also a form of resistance. Quiet, but real. You walk again. No one says anything. Just the slap of sandals, the creak of rope against your shoulders, and the clack of bricks bumping as they're stacked. Rome, maybe built from stones, but it grew from steps without sound. Your steps don't impress. No one exclaims, "Look, a builder of Rome." No one stops to snap a photo of you in that golden 90-degree sunlight. But still, you walk, steady, slow, sure, like water dripping on stone, wearing down an empire without anyone noticing. You once thought, if only I were a sculptor or a mural painter. But then you understood. Rome doesn't lack statues. Rome lacks people to carry statues to the right place. You are the silent hand of history. You've screamed in your mind when your shoulders burned, when your basket fell, when the foreman yelled at you for the wrong reason. But out loud, you only breathed. In Rome, complaints are like pebbles dropped into a deep alley. No one hears, no one answers, and the echo isn't even your own. You are the one not named, the one not sung about in poetry. But without you, walls don't stand, ceilings don't curve, and history can't be photographed from its best angle. On your way back, you pass a beggar child crouched under an awning. He doesn't say anything, just looks at you. You look back, not with pity, but with a kind of acknowledgement. I get it. You're as tired as I am. Your steps make no sound. But sometimes, if you look closely at an old brick, you'll see a small slip, a dog's paw print pressed in when the clay was still soft. Not the mark of an emperor, not an architect, maybe someone like you, who accidentally stepped on it while rushing to dry a batch. A trace no one can scrub off, no one writes down, but it's there, as proof that you once existed, once passed through, once lived a full day in silence. And if someone ever asks, how did Rome survive for thousands of years? You won't answer. You'll just walk. One more brick, one more basket, one more breath through stinging sunlight. Evening descends on Rome, but not like in paintings. There's no radiant sunset. No doves landing on domes to coo out philosophy. There's only a long shadow stretching behind you, and a brick basket still full like it never emptied. Light slices through stone walls, hitting your eyes, but you no longer blink from glare, simply because your eyelids are done, and sunlight is the only thing today that hasn't weighed down your shoulders. You don't know how many trips you've made, 10, 20, or maybe 1,000 from a past life. At a Roman construction site, no one keeps track of time. There's only the sun, and when the light hits sideways, it means you have 1 hour left to survive. Time, in the evening, isn't something to count. It's something to outlast. You see Gaius again, still hunched, still smiling with his eyes. No one asks, "You okay?" As long as you see each other still walking, you know neither of you has fallen yet. Another child, probably too young to carry, is assigned to splash water on a sand pile. He works slowly, eyes watching you like he's learning early what adult exhaustion looks like. You drop the bricks. Your back no longer creaks, not because it recovered, but because it's too tired to make a sound. In Rome, no one asks if you're tired. No one measures fatigue with tools or advice. You work until you can't stand anymore. And then someone simply says, "He's too soft." You want to sit, but fear if you do, you'll never stand again. So you stay upright, like a stone statue, carved from dust, wind, and your own breath. Rome's afternoon drags on like a song with no chorus. You don't remember which note it started on, and you're not sure when it'll end. Each step, each load, all blur together so much. You stop feeling them. You're no longer you. You're just a repeated motion, like Rome wrote that sequence into your muscles this morning. All you know now, each step forward, the bricks feel lighter, not because the load has lessened, but because you've accepted it as part of you. In the distance, the sun sets behind the roof tiles. In Rome, the sun is a clock, a silent supervisor, a boss who needs no words to be obeyed. When its shadow tilts, you know you've got one last stretch. When it disappears, you know there's no more reason to push. But Rome hasn't let you go yet. No one claps. No one stops to admire you. Because the day isn't done, and the man hasn't rested. But you lift your head, look at the quiet red sky, and in that brief moment, amid bricks, sweat, and dust, you still have the ability to see beauty. You leave the worksite when the sky has darkened, not because the work is done, but because the light is dim enough that you can no longer see the bricks. Rome doesn't need anyone working in the dark, because the dark belongs to others, rats, thieves, and memories. You drag your feet along the cobbled road. No words, no thoughts. Your legs know the way home, even if your mind is empty, like an abandoned house. You call it home, but it doesn't feel like one. Just a rented room on the 3rd floor of an insulae. A poor tenement with thin walls, a rotting roof, and wooden stairs that creak like an old man left unfed. Ground floor is a bakery, 2nd floor a blacksmith, and the 4th collapsed last month. Your room has 2 straw mats, a water jug that smells like time, and a rat with a name, because it was here before you. Left corner, your sandals. Right corner, a pile of unwashed clothes. The room doesn't embrace you. It just doesn't reject you. You sit down. The walls are thin as mouse belly skin. From next door comes the sound of an argument. One male voice, one female, and the crash of a bowl. You don't turn your head. In the insulae, every night is a repeat play. You don't turn on the lights, because there are none. You don't need light anymore. All day long, you've lived in a light that burned your skin, broke your back, and shattered your thoughts. Gaius returns after you. You don't know where he came from. Some say he used to be a stonecutter in Ostia. Others say he ran from military duty. But to you, he's someone who doesn't snore, doesn't borrow things and forget to return them. Enough to share a room. He doesn't greet. You don't ask. Both of you just share the silence, like leftovers. He sits down on the edge of the bed, unties his sandals, legs stretched out like he's breathing through his heels. A mosquito flies by. You don't swat it. It needs to live. And you're too tired to fight anything other than yourself. You close your eyes, not to sleep, just to stop for a while. In Rome, sleep is a privilege. Not everyone with a bed can fall asleep. Some nights, your legs ache. Some nights, your stomach. Some nights, you're just cold and worried. And some nights, you don't know what you're still alive for. So when you lie down and breathe evenly, that's already the biggest reward the day has to offer. Because in Rome, sleep doesn't come like a friend. It comes like an old master, knocking with a heavy hand and asking, "Have you been tired enough today?" You don't answer. You just lie there, listening to Gaius's breathing, listening to the wind, listening to yourself. You don't have a medal. No one wrote down how many bricks you carried today, how much water you drank, how many times you slipped, and how many times you got back up. History doesn't ask. Rome doesn't ask. Not even you. Bother to ask anymore. Because simply, you're still here. Gaius is asleep, mouth slightly open, hands curled like hugging an old dream. You look at him, not with pity, just understanding. Understanding a quiet life that doesn't need to be told, doesn't need a pat on the back, just needs not to be erased. You used to think living in the great empire meant you had to do something grand. Fight battles, become a statue, be carved into history. But then, year after year, you understood. Rome loves victors, but it survives thanks to those who simply endure. No need for praise, no need for honor, no need for greatness. Just surviving each day is already a victory. Outside, Rome glows with scattered oil lamps. Up above, the palaces, the arenas, the temples, glistening like pre-packaged glory. But down below is you, lying on a straw mat. You don't need light. You've seen enough. You've seen pain, the cold, and the warmth, small but real. When you get to lie still, unnamed, uncommanded, you close your eyes, not to dream, but to retreat from everything. Not to run, but to pull back just a little. You think of tomorrow, bricks again, sun again, Gaius groaning over tight shoes again. But in that moment, you exhale softly, because you know tomorrow will begin again, and you're still here. And if someone, somewhere, even 1,000 years from now, happens to mention you, they don't have to write anything grand. No statues needed, no history books required. Because history, no matter how thick, doesn't have room for all the hands that laid mortar, for all the backs bent under 100 kilos of bricks. You, and thousands of others, are the silent foundation the whole empire stands on. No one calls your name. But every dome, every stone, is a silent thank you. Because you, like thousands of others, may have no grave, no plaque, no remembered face. But maybe, right now, someone is touching the wall of the Colosseum, and their hand rests on a brick you once carried. Just write this one sentence. This person carried bricks for Rome and survived. If you're tired to the point you don't want to answer messages, tired enough to just lie there, eyes open, thinking nothing, tired enough to feel yourself fading from this world. Then remember, there once was someone who carried bricks for Rome with no day off, no pension, no right to complain. If they were tired, they still carried, because if they stopped, someone else would take their place, and their name, like so many others, would vanish like dust on the cobbled roads. But sometimes, if you get close to an old wall, you'll see a brick with a handprint, smudged, faint, like they just accidentally touched it while turning. No one knows whose hand, no one recorded it, but the mark remains, a quiet proof that they once existed, with cracked shoulders, a patched basket, and a heart no one praised. That person never became a statue, wasn't in any film, didn't have their name on any victory column, but that person kept walking, under the sun, through dust, through long days no one even remembers, and that person survived. You don't need to be strong right now, don't need to finish anything, just breathe. Just know, somewhere in history, someone was as tired as you and still made it to the next day. You are part of that, not Rome, but what silently kept Rome standing. So, close your eyes if needed, pause if you're weary, and when you're ready to move again, remember this: it's not the fastest who are strong, it's the ones still walking after everything. If you're still listening at this point, then you've made it through a whole day, not in Rome, but in your own mind. Maybe today you didn't carry bricks, but you carried deadlines, unanswered messages, unpaid bills, or simply carried yourself through a heavy day. No one praised you. No one counted how many thoughts you had to swallow. No one called out the sadness you're holding, but you're still here. You, like that brick carrier, not glorious, but not fallen. You don't need to end today in spectacular fashion. No need to answer all the emails. No need to untie every knot. Just allow yourself to breathe softly. Allow yourself to feel a little sad. Allow yourself to shrink when you no longer have the strength to be big. History won't remember you. The world might scroll past you, but you still deserve to rest. And if tonight you lie down, hands heavy, heart tired, then remember, someone once carried bricks for Rome and went through an entire life just to lie down at the end of the day, like you do now. Charles Martel and Pepin the Short, 737 to 768. Tesseri Titzedetschirm. Year 737. On the Frankish throne, a king named Thierry IV, a name few remember, passed away. Thierry was one of the last Merovingian kings, a dynasty rotted from within, where kings were symbols, not rulers. When he died, the whole kingdom seemed to have nothing left to mourn. And then, no one took the throne, no succession ceremony, no new king's name proclaimed in the church, no praises or crown struggles, just one man standing in the power vacuum, quietly seizing it. His name was Charles Martel. People called him the Hammer, not by accident. Martel in Latin is martellus, meaning hammer, a name that evokes a weapon heavy, unsharp, but capable of crushing any defense line. Every decision Charles made, though quiet, struck like a resounding blow across Europe. He didn't need flowery words. He only needed force, the force of someone who knows when to strike and where. No one handed Charles a crown. He didn't bother asking, because he didn't need it. In name, Charles was merely Maire du Palais, that is, mayor of the palace, a sort of chief manager, the king's deputy in running court, military, and the treasury. But the maire du palais in the 8th century was no longer palace doorkeeper. He'd become the one running the kingdom. This position once served Merovingian kings as right hand, but as they fell into figurehead status, the maire du palais became the real power behind the throne. Charles didn't create that position. He was simply the first with enough guts not to need anyone above him. But did any real king still exist? No king, no problem. The army remained. Taxes kept coming. The royal seal still mattered. And most importantly, the nobles of the Franks still respected him. Not just nobles, but the church chose to stay silent or quietly support him. To them, Charles maintained order, repelled invasions, respected the church. Clerics needed a strong protector. Nobles needed a land distributor. And both knew, if forced to choose between a puppet king and a hammer with real power, they'd pick the hammer. The Frankish world wasn't exactly a nation, but a quilt sewn from mismatched patches. Austrasia in the east, Neustria in the west, Burgundy wedged in like the neglected middle child. Each region had its own mixed tongue, laws, and cautious nobles suspicious of any central power. Charles wasn't foolish enough to flip the board by wearing a crown. He didn't need to be king. He just needed to run things like one, like a conductor who doesn't sing, but still makes the orchestra play to his tune. They say Charles despised extravagance. No purple robes, no throne. But in every council, every military campaign, everyone turned first to him and asked, "What's next?" But power doesn't come from humility. It comes from the hammer. Charles Martel was a strategist and a warrior no one dared challenge. He defeated formidable Muslim armies at the Battle of Poitiers in 732, shocking all Europe. It wasn't just a battle, it was a halt to an empire's advance. The Umayyads, having conquered nearly all of Iberia, swept across the Pyrenees, blazing through Aquitaine and heading toward the Christian center, Tours. Charles didn't have elite cavalry, but he had infantry, packed tight as iron walls, holding firm for 7 days and nights, like a wall, not glorious, not showy, but impenetrable. After that battle, Charles wasn't only a victorious general. He became protector of the West, shield of Christendom, and, of course, the man everyone assumed was king, though none dared to call him so. Some wore crowns, yet couldn't command, and some, like Charles, needed no throne, no oath, no emblem on breast. They only needed soldiers' respect, clerics' trust, and the nod of property-holding nobles. History sometimes doesn't give power to those with royal blood, but to those bold enough to see silence and chaos, and mold it into a new order. Year 741. Charles Martel dies. No state funeral, no succession like king passes to king, because he was never king. But he left something more complex than a crown, a kingdom that couldn't remain unchanged. For by Frankish tradition, a kingdom wasn't a nation, it was property, to be divided among sons. Clovis divided land for 4 sons. Dagobert did the same. And Charles, though not king, followed tradition. A divided legacy, not only of land, but a whole realm. A divided legacy, not only of land, but an entire kingdom. The Franks weren't a throne. You couldn't hand it intact to an heir. It was more like a field that must be equally split among sons to avoid being seen as unjust. Charles had 2 sons. Carloman, disciplined, devout, and a stickler for order. Pepin, smart, decisive, and not a fan of working with his brother. The split wasn't just geographical, it was conflicting personalities and visions. Carloman sought social purification through faith. Pepin wanted control through laws. While Carloman held collective prayers in monasteries, Pepin gathered nobles in stone halls to discuss land and armies. They were brothers, but this realm wasn't big enough for both their ambitions. Carloman, disciplined, devout, and craving order. Pepin, clever, decisive, uninterested in cooperation. So the Frankish realm, already a patched garment, was cut in two. Carloman ruled Austrasia, the eastern half. Pepin took Neustria, the western half. The division wasn't an act of brotherly kindness or legal transparency. It was a pending political headache. Nobles in each region now answered only to their own regional king. Each side had its own laws, its own monastic backers, and loyal soldiers ready to torch the opponent's villages if needed. Carloman, the elder, couldn't tolerate the chaos. He summoned a council of clerics, calling it a social purification. He banned alcohol, reinforced clerical discipline, forced nobles to submit to morality. Then suddenly, he withdrew. No one truly knows why. Some say he was drained by internal strife. Some claim he had a divine vision. Others rumor he was pressured. Some historians suspect, did Pepin quietly edge his brother out of the game? Did Carloman lose and Monte Cassino Monastery become his only place of autonomy? Whatever the truth, that decision handed total power to Pepin, who never dreamed of donning a monk's tonsure. In 747, Carloman renounced his crown, tonsured his head, and retreated into Monte Cassino, leaving authority to his brother. Pepin was now ruler not just of Neustria, but of the entire realm. But there was a big problem. He still wasn't king. In name, the Frankish throne still belonged to a weak Merovingian, a puppet king put in place for form's sake. His name was Childeric III, the last Merovingian. But name alone didn't grant dignity. He didn't run court, lead armies, or sign any major treaties. When the court needed a presence at ceremonies, they invited him. When lords needed someone to not protest, they kept him around. A king, but even the guards didn't salute him. A king, regarded across Francia as a historical reminder yet unfulfilled. Pepin didn't want to remain in his father's shadow. He wanted to be recognized as a real king, with a cloak, crown, and the sacred aura from God. But could a man without Merovingian blood become king? Charles Martel ruled without a crown, because he was strong. Pepin was different. He needed legitimacy because he wanted a throne for his children. And he understood, strength is ephemeral, but faith and ritual, if properly established, can endure centuries. From that moment, the dream of a sacred kingship began to take form, no longer reliant on bloodline, but on blessings from Rome. In the Frankish kingdom, hair was not just hair. Just like the pharaoh's crown, the Roman laurel wreath, or a Native American chief's feathers, long hair in Frankish culture was not merely appearance. It was a natural crown, a living symbol of power, sanctity, and lineage. In a world without birth certificates, without DNA tests, hair was the royal passport, the only thing that said whether you deserved people's kneeling or not. It was a symbol, a declaration, the divider between an ordinary man and a legitimate king. The Franks believed sacred strength lay in long hair. Since Clovis's time, Merovingian kings wore long hair as a sign of power, not to be cut, not to be touched. It was sacred, like the crown of the Lord. So, if you wanted to depose a king without killing him, you cut his hair. And that's exactly what Pepin planned to do. Childeric III, the last puppet king, though ruling nothing, still wore his long hair as proof of surviving the past. To change the order, Pepin needed more than an army. He needed to change the symbol. But this wasn't just about cutting hair. You couldn't casually touch a sacred symbol without inviting disaster. Pepin needed a legal miracle, and he found it in Pope Zachary. Pope Zachary wasn't just a spiritual leader. He stood in a century of chaos, squeezed between the Lombards in the north and the decay of Byzantium in the east. Rome needed a protector, and Pepin needed the spiritual key to open the throne's door. This was not a prayer, it was a deal. Pepin would help the Vatican fight the Lombards. In return, the Pope would allow him to become king. The Pope, struggling with the Lombard threat in Italy, needed a patron, a morally strong man to defend Rome. Pepin posed a question. In a kingdom, who deserves to be king? The man in name, or the man who actually rules? And Pope Zachary replied, the one who truly holds power should wear the crown. That answer, simple as it seemed, upended the entire logic of European kingship. It opened the path for powerful men to become kings. Finally, in 751, Pepin had Childeric III's hair cut and sent him to a monastery, permanently removing him from the throne. People didn't record Childeric's expression. But imagine this, a man born of royal blood, raised as a living symbol, now stripped of his sacred hair and spending the rest of his life behind monastery walls. Not executed, not killed, just forgotten. A dynasty that ruled over 250 years, ended with a snip and silence. One lineage ended, another began. Charles Martel, Pepin's father, never wore a crown. He didn't need it. He was the hammer, the crusher of Muslim forces at Tours, a living symbol of pure power. Pepin, his son, was different. He needed ceremony. He needed legitimacy. And instead of a hammer blow, he chose a haircut. A dynasty born, not in victory, but by hair clipping. Maybe Pepin didn't just want to be king. He wanted to set a ritual, a precedent. That power doesn't come from bloodline, but from recognition. Not from the people, but from God, through the church. Pepin's snip didn't just cut hair, it cut off old beliefs and replaced them with a new order, where the church blessed, and the new king didn't need royal blood, but divine selection. One question, just one sentence, short as a greeting, but enough to shift Europe's power axis for the next 1,000 years. In a kingdom, who deserves to be king? The one in name, or the one who truly rules? The questioner was Pepin, son of Charles Martel, a man who never wore a crown, a leader who unified all the Franks but was still not called king. And the one receiving the question, Pope Zachary, head of the Catholic Church, struggling to balance faith and geopolitics. But before answering, imagine the Pope's position then. Rome, once the world's capital, was now abandoned. Byzantine troops withdrawn, Lombards encroaching. Pope Zachary wasn't just a sanctuary's keeper, he was guarding the last candle of a fading Rome. Then, a letter came from the north, an offer or disguised plea. Rome's reply wasn't long, no parliament, no elections, just one sentence. The one with real power should wear the crown. And so, one dynasty vanished, not just with words, but with the first anointing ceremony for a Frankish king. Pepin was anointed holy at Soissons, a ceremony never done before. He didn't just get called king, he became God's chosen. This was the start of a centuries-long tradition. From Pepin to Charlemagne, from Capet to Louis, all future French kings had to be anointed, to be legitimate in God's sight. From then on, the throne was no longer hereditary property. It became a sacred sacrament. Another dynasty was born. In the East, the Byzantine Empire, in Constantinople, had a different model. There, emperors didn't need the Pope's blessing, because he was head of the church himself. In Byzantium, the king was God on earth, leading both church law and state. In contrast, in the West, from Pepin onward, kings needed approval from a spiritual authority. This created two completely different ruling models, and eventually led to centuries of tension between the two Romes, Rome and Constantinople. This was the first turning point of the Western concept of divine right of kings. From now on, to be king, you didn't need to be a king's son. You needed to be blessed by the Pope. Imagine this in modern terms. A president doesn't need elections. Just one spiritual leader says, "This person fits God's will." From that act, European kingship was no longer blood inheritance. It was a position that could be conferred by God through the Vatican. And from there, a new alliance was born. The Church granted sanctity. The king provided sword and soldiers. The Pope was defended, and Pepin got the throne. A sale done quietly, no blood, no rebellion, but with influence rivaling any revolution. It's notable that almost no one protested. The Merovingian nobility, shielded by past glory, either were bought off or simply powerless. No uprisings, no assassinations, no pretenders. Pepin, with church support, soldiers and lords, cleared resistance silently, almost elegantly. This wasn't just a coup. It was a rebranding, organized like a medieval PR campaign. Pepin's question seemed simple, but was actually a test of belief. Because once Europe accepted that power needed anointing, from then on, every throne needed the church. And thus, no matter how strong a king was, he still had to kneel, at least once, before the cross. In 754, a simple ceremony took place on Frankish soil, but one that would forever change Europe. The special guest that day was not a prince, nor a frontier noble, but Pope Stephen II, who had crossed the icy Alps to reach Saint-Denis. Not just to visit, but to anoint a man of no Merovingian blood as king. A man who rose from the role of palace manager. A short man, yet of unwavering resolve. Pepin the Short. Previously, the Frankish king was chosen, supported, or simply whoever was the strongest. Pepin wanted more than that. He wanted divine confirmation. He wanted every land, every castle, from Burgundy to Austrasia, to bow not just to power, but to God's will. And that divine will needed a witness. So Pepin wrote to the Pope, asking a simple yet throne-shaking question across Europe. Who should be king? One with lineage, or one who truly rules? Pope Stephen II, under Lombard threats in Italy, saw an opportunity. He saw in Pepin a king turned protector of the church, at a time when the Byzantine Empire was too distant and too weak. So they met. At Saint-Denis, the Pope didn't just anoint Pepin. He anointed both of his sons, Carloman and Charles, later known as Charlemagne. The ceremony took place under dim candlelight, incense smoke rising in Saint-Denis, like a bridge between heaven and earth. The Pope, clad in gold-embroidered white robes, carried the holy oil and slowly approached the short king. He dabbed oil on Pepin's forehead, then chest, then shoulders, each anointing symbolizing a sacred covenant between God and worldly power. Those outside the church couldn't hear clearly, but they knew something monumental had happened, a shift from history into legend. It was a freezing winter's day, and the Pope's journey across the Alps was far from easy, icy, dangerous, and politically charged. But he came, because power and faith must travel to survive. Stephen II knew, without a Western protector, the church would lose independence to the Lombards. So he anointed Pepin, not just as ritual, but as a covenant between heaven and earth. This was the first time in history that a pope directly anointed a Western king. From that moment, the Carolingian dynasty was no longer merely forged by conquest, but God-chosen. The handshake between Pope and Pepin was a brilliant political success, but it also planted the seeds of centuries of conflict. Not all Frankish nobles were pleased. In Aquitaine, in Provence, on eastern frontiers, many lords viewed the ceremony with suspicion. A man with no Merovingian blood claiming to be king. To them, papal anointing was a political ploy, not divine will. Some refused allegiance. Minor rebellions broke out. But Pepin, now a king by holy oil, had both church and loyal cavalry behind him. As history always proves, legitimacy favors the victor. Who holds more power? The one wearing the crown, or the one who blesses it? History has taught us, a king can rule by sword, but will fall without blessing. The Pope, though he bears no army, needs only a drop of holy oil to found an empire. From that day at Saint-Denis, Europe entered a new era, where kingship depended not only on blades, but also on the cross. The two-sword doctrine was born, a lasting symbol in medieval politics. One sword for martial power, the king's. One for spiritual authority, the Pope's. While both swords aligned, order held. But when they clash, Europe plunged into crisis. Here, Pepin and the Pope laid the foundation of a power model that every later king, from Charlemagne to Napoleon, would either embrace or resist. Charlemagne never aimed to be a provincial ruler. From the beginning, he aspired to more than just inheriting his father's lands. He wanted a kingdom bigger, more enduring, and more sacred. To achieve this, he needed three things: a disciplined army, a central territory, and validation from God. All three converged in Italy. Italy, more than wine and relics. Before Charlemagne set foot there, Italy wasn't a subdued land. The Lombard kingdom had held northern Italy for over 2 generations. They spoke German, followed Arianism, and resisted papal authority. King Desiderius was not only a military threat, but a symbol of Christian division. He had pressured the Pope to crown his son-in-law king, sparking fear in Rome of being overshadowed by sword and heresy. In 754, Pope Stephen II was protected from the Lombards by Pepin the Short. But the southern threat remained. Now, after Pepin's death, that burden fell to Charlemagne. In 773, as the Lombards again pressured the Pope, Charlemagne took action. But he didn't just aim to assist the Pope. He wanted to step into the land that mighty emperors once ruled, Rome. A campaign unlike any other. Charlemagne didn't march with just swords and spears, but with endurance. To reach Italy, he led his army across the Alps, the majestic yet brutal path. Sweeping winds and snow battered the camps. Horses died on slippery rocks. Frankish soldiers, accustomed to flat lands, now crawled narrow mountain trails fit for one. Some fell into ravines. Some lost fingers to frost. Legend says that during a blizzard night, Charlemagne knelt and prayed in a mountain pass, asking for life to fulfill his sacred mission. And, as if answered, the army broke through. When they saw the plains of Pavia, the riders cheered, not for victory, but for survival. Charlemagne led his force across the Alps in a campaign described as crossing snow-ridden skies for faith. Unaccustomed to rugged terrain, the Franks succeeded only through meticulous logistics and savvy troop divisions, advancing straight to Pavia, the Lombard capital. After a year under siege, Desiderius surrendered. This wasn't a campaign for land alone. It redefined Charlemagne from a king to the supreme protector of the church. Rome, where Charlemagne kneeled but never bowed. Yet the most significant moment wasn't on the battlefield, but in Rome's clerical chambers. Here, Charlemagne performed a profound act. He issued a decree granting the lands taken from the Lombards to the Pope. This gift wasn't mere diplomacy. It birthed the Papal States, which would endure for roughly 1100 years. Charlemagne, a foreign king from the north, became the benefactor of Rome, and he did it not by decree, but by legitimacy and trust. Once again, Charlemagne outsmarted most kings. He didn't demand the crown. He gave away land, and in return earned God's favor. When entering Rome, he did not claim a throne. He arrived as a protector, but also implied, if anyone deserved papal anointment, it was him. Pope Hadrian I welcomed him as a savior. Here, Charlemagne decreed the donation of former Lombard lands to the Pope, a gesture not only diplomatic, but a statement. I, Charlemagne, have the authority to grant territory, but I also need God's sanction to rule the rest of Europe. A treaty. Without a signature, Charlemagne and Pope Hadrian I, two men from two worlds, reached a silent accord. Charlemagne was not subordinate, but neither placed himself above the Pope. This was the model of dual powers. Two swords, one for the Church, one for the Emperor, both aimed at the same goal, protecting Christendom. Yet between them remained a thin line, the line between blessing and authority, between divine mandate and political sovereignty. One day, that line would be tested in the anointment ceremony in Rome. Charlemagne didn't sign any formal pact, but upon leaving Rome, he was regarded as the Church's son, and the Church, in silence, considered him the leading contender for a new emperor. That title wouldn't come immediately, but from those muddy steps into Rome, the dream of reviving the Western Roman Empire began. When you think of Charlemagne, remember, he didn't conquer Rome by claiming a throne. He protected Rome, and in turn, Rome blessed his rule. In history, greatness sometimes comes not from conquest, but from giving at the right moment. And in Italy, Charlemagne offered his greatest gift, the belief that a king can be warrior, protector, and devout servant, all at once. Charlemagne was not just a warrior or a son of the Church. He was the architect of a new political order, where every power, from castle to cloister, was bound by oath and fief. An old order, recycled smartly. Charlemagne wasn't the first to grant land for loyalty. The Romans did it, the Franks did it too, but Charlemagne turned it into a system. He didn't need dramatic reform. He just needed people to believe that granting land was part of faith, a power that comes from God, but distributed by land, sword, and oath. A system without blueprints. The 8th century had no constitution, no unified code, no government headquarters. Yet Charlemagne had something stronger than documents. Loyalty tied to land. A loyal lord. Give him a piece of land, a fief, a brave warrior. Reward him with a fortress and demand an oath. I serve you until my blood runs dry. Each parcel of land, a political pawn. Charlemagne didn't grant land haphazardly. He studied each region, where rebellions could spark, where borders needed guarding, where a trusted man must be in charge. A lord too powerful, he subdivided the land. A rising warrior, grant land, but place him under supervision. Land grants became both reward and control. Oaths, the medieval contract, no paperwork, no notary. Only a kneeling knee, a hand on scripture, and a pledge. I swear loyalty to you, serving with sword and blood. The one who swears is the vassal. The one who receives is the lord. The land is the bond between them. If a vassal betrays, he loses more than land. He loses honor and God's protection. An empire built on personal bonds. To sustain a vast empire, Charlemagne couldn't be everywhere. So he sent out the missi dominici, the king's envoys. These were unique pairs, a cleric and a noble, dispatched from the center to the provinces, with supreme authority as the emperor's representatives. They oversaw lords, reviewed monasteries, and sometimes mediated disputes. The missi dominici were Charlemagne's eyes and ears, and sometimes his iron fist. No bureaucracy, no standing army. But with these envoys, Charlemagne could shake the empire with a remote reminder. It wasn't just warriors who received land and pledges. Clerics, abbots, bishops became special vassals too. Charlemagne understood. To govern such territory, he needed more than steel. He needed prayer, literacy, scribes, and propaganda. Thus, monasteries were granted estates. In return, clergy swore loyalty, preached the right doctrine, and offered prayers for the empire in each mass. Here, worldly and spiritual power met for the first time through the contract of land grants. Charlemagne had no Roman-style bureaucracy. Instead, he built a network of trusted men and made them trust one another. From Saxon castles to Pyrenean monasteries, every stronghold of the empire was anchored by honor and loyalty. Some were nobles, some were former soldiers, some were sword-wielding monks. Of course, not all remained loyal forever. There were rebellions, betrayals, plots. But what Charlemagne created wasn't a utopia. It was an order in which everyone knew their place. Those below knew whom to pledge. Those above knew what to grant to be served. The price of an oath wasn't just blood. It was the loss of freedom. When you're a vassal, you're no longer free. You belong to a lord. You gain honor, but also the chains of a system you pledge to. Charlemagne didn't force oaths, but he made people believe that not pledging was disrespect. In a tumultuous Europe, where the king couldn't be everywhere, where laws weren't on paper, Charlemagne laid the foundation for a system held together not by orders, but by trust. From those oaths sprang an era, the era of lords, knights, and orderly fragmentation. Charlemagne didn't just build a network of personal loyalty, he legalized it. At first, an oath was between two people, a knee down, a hand on the cross. But Charlemagne soon realized, words fade, but written records endure. He began to require oaths to be written down, copied, stored in monasteries, and sometimes multiplied in copies. From vague social contracts, oaths became evidence. Capitularia, the first governance papers of Europe. Capitularia were more than documents. They formed a clear classification. Capitula legibus addenda, provisions augmenting tribal laws, like Salic or Ripuarian codes. Capitula per se scribenda, independent decrees binding across the empire, especially for administration. Capitula missorum, directives sent to the missi dominici, detailed orders for executing imperial law. Each type of capitularia addressed a need: manage the Franks, coordinate distant provinces, and assert that imperial authority came not just from sword, but from the written word. Charlemagne had no constitution, but he did have capitularia, the Carolingian legal framework. They recorded imperial edicts, teachings, and orders, and travelled to the provinces via missi dominici. Capitularia weren't laws in a modern sense, but they created structure and standards for power. Vassals read them, clerics copied them, and people began to obey. Law and faith no longer separate. To carry law to the people, you needed scribes. Charlemagne knew this, so he strongly supported educational reform. Monastic schools emerged everywhere, especially in Tours, Fulda, Corbie. There, monks learned Latin, theology, and how to copy capitularia. Copying was no longer a trivial task. It became political. Whoever controlled the words held authority. Before Charlemagne, Frankish law, church law, tribal law existed in parallel. But now, law and faith were intertwined. Betraying an oath wasn't just a crime. It was a sin against God. By legitimizing oaths in writing, Charlemagne turned personal morality into political principle. A state without a capital, but with conviction, the lasting impact of oaths and capitularia didn't end with the Carolingian Empire. In England, oath-bound loyalty became central to vassal-liege relations, paving the way for documents like Magna Carta in 1215. In France and Germany, feudal legal systems and territorial grants were directly shaped by Charlemagne's legal model. Even in later Catholic courts, many ecclesiastical regulations preserved the spirit of oath legalism as a direct legacy of this era. Charlemagne had no single capital like Paris. He travelled constantly. At each stop, the court was built temporarily, but he left behind things not made of wood or stone. Oaths, capitularia, the missi dominici network, and trust in order. That order was legal, moral, political, all in one. When Charlemagne died in 814, the empire he left behind wasn't stable. It was divided, fragmented, then dissolved into kingdoms. But the idea he planted, that loyalty could be recorded, managed, and legalized, did not vanish. It spread across Europe. It lived in charters, law codes, and manifestos. And as France, Germany, and Italy emerged, they carried with them a legacy invisible but fundamental. The oath you once spoke before Charlemagne is now law. In 768, Pepin died. There was no grand procession, no flowery farewell, just a short king, quietly exiting the political stage, but leaving behind an empire. A man not big enough to be king, and proven otherwise. Pepin was not as tall as his son, Charlemagne, not as valiant as his father, Charles Martel. He had no resounding battlefield victories, only a series of negotiations, appointments, annexations, diplomacy. A king who didn't overwhelm, but convinced. A usurper, but one anointed and blessed by the Pope. Saint-Denis, his resting place, and the birthplace of France. From the moment Pepin chose Saint-Denis as his burial site, it became more than the end of a king's life. It became a political shrine. Every succeeding king who came here was not just interred, but affirmed the continuity of royal authority. Saint-Denis gradually assumed two roles: royal necropolis and eternal monument to legitimacy. On September 24, 768, Pepin was buried at the Basilica of Saint-Denis, the resting place of France's kings. From then on, tombs became more than personal rest. They became dynastic symbols. Pepin was not just buried among kings. He was the first to be anointed and crowned by a pope, opening a new era, when the throne no longer came from the sword, but from sanctification. 2 sons and a fateful division. Following Frankish custom, he divided the kingdom between his 2 sons. Carloman received Austrasia and southern Burgundy. Charlemagne received Neustria and Aquitaine, a division that seemed balanced. But within 2 years, Carloman suddenly died. Charlemagne became the sole ruler of both realms, and from here the real story began. One death, many legacies. Compared to Clovis, the first baptized Frankish king, and Dagobert, the builder of Saint-Denis as a spiritual center, Pepin had no similarly dazzling moment. But he was the one who quietly relaid the rails of Frankish history. From a throne that had been a birthright, Pepin turned it into a result of political and religious agreement. He made Rome an ally, made the Pope the confirmer of royalty, and made all kings after him realize, to sit on the throne, you must have holy oil on your forehead. Pepin's death wasn't an end, but a crossroads between 2 eras. He was the last of a world where royalty might come from loyalty or force, and the first to introduce a new principle: kingship must be sanctified. From now on, every succeeding king would need the Pope as a sacred seal to legalize authority. Not just as a ruler, they must be God-chosen. Pepin died, but did not vanish. He left behind a kingdom made legitimate by the Pope, a governing system where church and state no longer clashed, but coexisted. A new notion of kingship that could be bestowed, not merely inherited. No one remembered Pepin's height. They only remembered that he was Charlemagne's father, the first man in medieval European history, both lawful king and consecrated ruler, and proof that you don't have to be tall to change history. Do you think an empire is built from gold, ideals, or hymns? Wrong. Charlemagne's empire, the great emperor of post-Roman Europe, was built from hammer, brick, and oaths of loyalty. From war tool to political tool. Before there was a throne, there was a hammer. Not Thor's thunder hammer, but Charles Martel, the hammer of God, who stopped the Muslim wave at Poitiers in 732. He didn't need a crown, didn't need anointment. He needed real power, a loyal army, and lands to reward service. That was when land grants began to matter, rewarding loyalty with land, using wealth to bind obligation. The weak exchanged their blood for fields. The powerful built empires by knowing how to reward properly. The first bricks were laid by Charles Martel, but Pepin the Short was the one who built the solid foundation. He negotiated with the Pope, rebuilt the power structure, shaped the role of the Holy King, so his grandson, Charlemagne, could build further with even grander ideals. Moreover, Pepin established a tighter local administration, granting land management to trusted lords, and built a mobile court system, bringing real power to border regions. Also, Pepin's education policy laid the groundwork for the Carolingian Renaissance. He supported monastic schools where noble children, and even those of lower classes, learned reading, writing, and scripture. A dynasty cannot rely indefinitely on swords and horses. It needs words and law. Importantly, Pepin didn't just do the job of a king. He was a subtle coordinator of religion and political power. He was the first to be anointed twice, making ascension not just a political event, but a sanctified act. He understood that kingship must not only be powerful, but also recognized by God. Building a dynasty with brown brick, not gold, Charlemagne, grandson of Charles Martel, did not build castles on sand. He built them of brick, of administrative units, of placing monks in remote areas, of establishing schools in monasteries, of uniform calligraphy. The Carolingian dynasty was not a sweet dream. It was a dream heavy with the sweat of builders and the ink of scholars. Religion did not trail power. It walked side by side. Clerics preached, but also recorded accounts. Monasteries were spiritual centers, but also archives, schools, news hubs. The new dynasty needed structured faith. God bestowed blessings, but records needed columns. Vassals had to take oaths, but also read the laws. The emperor needed legitimacy, but also needed walls around his palace built. Charlemagne inherited more than a crown. He inherited an idea of a unified Europe, under one faith, one feudal system, one script, an administrative structure later emulated from England to Italy. And strangely, it began with his grandfather's hammer, and with the bricks laid by Pepin the Short. Political and spiritual power, forged from the rawest materials,